The girl, lying on the bloody ground, realized that she had lost, and now only death awaited her. It was Idessa, a demon from the highest demonic tribe of the demon world. But the angel looking at her sincerely did not understand why Idessa was so hesitant at the end and still did not kill him. It was Ferdinand, the god of war. Such a question made Idessa laugh a lot, and she remembered that 120,000 years she had put up with all this time. It still ended up here, and she couldn't believe that Ferdinand blamed her for not dragging the guy along. Idessa was well aware that now it was truly her end, and she was willing to tear her own flesh and blood just to kill at least somehow this angel. Over the last 120,000 years, Idessa had done many bad things. She had reached the highest position in the demon clan, becoming incredibly powerful. But she didn't understand why long-forgotten scenes from the past were still flashing through her mind. Although she was now literally one step away from death, but the girl thought that it was still no reason to go crazy. And also why now Ferdinand started to heal her, even though it seemed silly since they were enemies. The guy explained that he wanted to give the girl another chance, which sounded like a joke to her. Ferdinand knew that Idessa had been too focused on getting revenge on him her whole life, so he decided to give her a chance to atone for her sins and regain her own strength. But all of a sudden, Idessa felt a strange sensation restraining her arm, and was immediately angry at Ferdinand, not understanding how he dared to do that to her. The guy warned that if Idessa does good deeds in the human world for just 1 year, she will be able to regain all her powers. But she needs to remember that if she attacks someone or doesn't do good deeds, she will die the most painful death possible. But if Idessa does make it through, she will be reborn with holy powers, and then Ferdinand will look forward to Idessa coming back to him so they can be together. Idessa was really pissed off at the damn man, after which she disappeared, leaving only a bit of her hair on Ferdinand's arms. The guy was sure that Idessa definitely would handle everything. The girl moved to the Empire, where the priests were discussing what they had been waiting for too long already, but the oracle said that their holy savior should appear soon. The only high priest of the Empire's capital city, named Lennox, explained that they just had to wait a little longer and didn't understand if his assistants had no faith at all. The agitated priests explained that they had already been awake for months, and one of them expressed his doubt that His Eminence had misunderstood the oracle's message. And because of this assumption, Lennox was very unhappy. I don't understand if his subordinates had any doubts about his qualifications. And also warned that the emperor was also very interested in the appearance of this man and that they should wait for him. So they should have been careful with their words, after which the fellow ordered everyone to recite the hymn they had sung yesterday. But suddenly, he noticed the disgruntled and frightened expression on the priests' faces. The episcopus didn't understand what it was connected with, for they looked as if they had completely forgotten the hymn and even how to speak. But then a priest with shaking hands pointed to Lennox behind his back, explaining that he should pay attention to the girl who had appeared. It was Idessa, who by now had swam out of the fountain. Everyone was amazed to see the girl and thought she was the saint they had been waiting for all this time. And the disgruntled Idessa could not understand for what reason her body looked and was so weak. Lennox was amazed and delighted that at last the saint they had waited so long for had appeared. But suddenly the girl, who had lost her former strength, could not stand it and fainted, so all the priests, together with Lennox, rushed to help her. Lennox came closer and measured Idessa's pulse and realized that the holy maiden was probably fine and she was fine. Initially, Idessa didn't realize who the people surrounding her were, so she explained to the spirits that if they were going to kill her, they had to do it very elegantly. After which, she cursed foully. And the priests were astonished, because it was impossible, and something had obviously gone wrong. Because according to them, a holy virgin like Lily could not swear. So the episcopos had a suspicion that it might be an entirely different girl. The emperor was happy to hear that God had sent them a legendary saint, and it was a messenger to their empire. This empire had many things, like an abundance of minerals and fertile land, and very talented and intelligent people. All these resources were in the Empire of Lucerne. In the past, Lucerne was just some small country, and the reason for its prosperity was the blessing of Ferdinand, the god of war. People still say that the emperor was sent by God himself. The Holy Virgin was created and sent to Earth by God to help the people live in peace and tranquility so that the empire could prosper even more. God first sent the Holy Virgin to Earth long ago, so everyone has been looking forward to her second coming ever since. When the emperor looked at Idesa lying in white robes on the bed, he realized that she was a real beauty. And even Lennox was surprised to hear such praise for the Holy Lady, because the emperor was famous for his cold blood. The emperor himself was surprised at such words of Lennox, because he is not some unfeeling monster who does not understand the obvious things and cannot see something beautiful. Lennox agreed, although he realized that the emperor had indeed always been very emotionless. Lennox thought about the fact that their emperor had turned a full 26 years old this year. His name was Raynel, and although the Lucerne emperor was very handsome, but his personality was actually a big mystery to everyone in the empire. Then the emperor began to ask about the saint who had come to Earth and where she had appeared. The episcop told him that the girl had appeared in the divine garden, and that he had seen her come out of the divine fountain with his own eyes. Raynel confessed that if it were not for the witness, he would never have believed in such a story. And the fact that a woman came out from under the water seemed to him simply unbelievable. And the episcopos believed that without a doubt, this girl was sent to them by Ferdinand himself, so that their empire would prosper. At least that was the opinion of almost everyone, and the exception was Raynel. And then the agitated Lennox turned around and made sure that no one had heard the emperor say it, because it could have been considered blasphemy. But Raynel was convinced that it would be foolish of God to send such a lovely lady to their land and not keep her for himself. An embarrassed Lennox coughed and explained to the emperor that it wasn't about her beauty at all. Then the episcopos admitted to himself that although their ruler was hard to understand, but now Lennox realized that Raynel was behaving in a very unnatural way. The emperor had never shown any interest in the clergy, and Raynel was not interested in God or blessings. But suddenly, he was interested in the appearance of the Holy Maiden. And it was as if the emperor considered the Holy Maiden as his bride. But that was impossible, so Lennox wondered why Raynel was so interested in the girl. But afterwards, Lennox ordered himself to stop, for he realized that his thoughts were very foolish. He would not understand Raynel. Idesa gradually began to wake up, which the episcopos noticed at once, so he waited impatiently for her to open her eyes. But when Idesa opened her eyes and stood up, the first person she saw was Raynel. The emperor was not happy that the girl had made him wait too long. When Idesa saw his face, she was convinced that Ferdinand had done what he wanted, so she was very angry. She wanted to hit Raynel, but she couldn't. So she hugged him. Idesa didn't know why she hugged Raynel. She also couldn't understand why, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't offend him. When Idesa was thinking about what was happening, she was silent, so the emperor had doubts about the saint, and he thought that their Holy Virgin was mute. Then Lennox explained that he had heard her speak earlier, so surely the Holy Virgin wanted to tell them something, but for some reason she couldn't. Then Idesa remembered Ferdinand, and that he really didn't like it when a girl cursed. And apparently that idiot had put a spell on Idesa so that she couldn't even say a bad word to anyone. And she thought that was a pretty low thing to do. But Raynel looked at Idesa with a smile, and realized that at their first meeting, the Holy Maiden had come to him with a hug, and so, in the emperor's opinion in the human world, she could definitely be considered an impudent girl. So Raynel was interested in her, and he wanted to know what the Holy Maiden wanted to tell him. Idesa noticed the obvious strong resemblance between Raynel and Ferdinand, so she was very angry with the guy. But then she noticed his eyes, which were blue, not golden like the god of war. She began to look at his face and didn't understand what had happened to Ferdinand's smile, because he had never smiled once in the last 100 years, and it seemed to her that Ferdinand was not capable of any emotion. But Lennox, noticing her silence, brought a pen and paper to Idesa and suggested that she use it to say something. This made Idesa very angry, for she was not mute. But before handing the girl the quill, Lennox decided to introduce himself and explained that he was the high priest of the Lucerne Empire. He then introduced Raynel to Idesa as well, explaining that this man was their emperor. And then Idesa was shocked and began to think about the information she had received and could not believe that she was really in the human world. And then it meant only one thing, that this man was just very similar to the Ferdinand she knew so well, which made her just as angry. But she didn't understand how the emperor could be like 2 drops of water like Ferdinand the god of war. And why did this even happen? Seeing the girl's agitation, Lennox bowed before her, explaining that he understood her feelings and that she was disturbed. He also explained that according to the oracle in the divine garden, Ferdinand himself was to send a holy maiden that would help the prosperity of their empire, so everyone was waiting for her appearance, as she came from the very fountain. When Idessa heard this, she was very excited, not realizing if it was really true. After that, she was even more shocked that she had just been called a saint maiden. And in the human world, she had accepted such a role. She remembered again the words of Ferdinand, who had promised to give Idessa another chance to keep her powers. And then Idessa was amazed to realize what that idiot had done. Idessa was still pissed off by his talk of good deeds, and that she was a holy maiden. And Idessa had been through a lot of things in her life. She had experienced betrayal, the death of loved ones, and murder. But she had never experienced being turned into a human being, or a saint, because it seemed ridiculous for her character. So Idessa decided that she would take revenge on Ferdinand as soon as she had the chance. But Lennox, noticing the girl's anger, distracted Idessa and awkwardly asked her to introduce herself, though she still doubted whether the Holy Maiden had a name, for names were often used by humans. But it was a trivial courtesy, so the episcopos was obliged to ask. Then the angry Idessa tried to shout at Lennox, but afterwards she realized that she could not say any swear words, which made her even more angry. Lennox and Raynal did not understand what was going on with the girl, because she looked very depressed. But Idessa clearly understood that she had to get out of this place as soon as possible, and promised that she would rip out Ferdinand's heart at the first opportunity and feed it to the Cerberus, her favorite 3-headed evil dogs. But as soon as she thought about it, her hand became insanely sore. The pain was so intense that the girl shook with spasms and let out a low squeal. Then Idessa looked at her hand and noticed the seal and remembered Ferdinand's words. He had warned Idessa that if she attacked anyone or did not do good deeds, she would die a most painful death. And then the girl realized that Ferdinand clearly didn't care if he did such foolishness. And she also realized that even in spite of everything he had done earlier, she would definitely kill him now. After all, not only had he sent her to the human world and made her a saint, he was also putting conditions on her. Though the guy had made her promise that if Idessa stayed in this place for a year, she would be allowed to regain her power to try and kill him. Although now it seemed to Idessa that it was more like some kind of bullying, but Ferdinando had always kept his promise. And what also worried her was that the guy had promised that he would keep an eye on the girl at all times. Then she realized that all that separated her from her happy revenge was 1 year. A year she had to hold out as long as she could. And then she would kill this man once and for all. But noticing the fact that Idessa was feeling very bad, the troubled episcopus tried to help Idessa and asked why she was in pain and what he could do to help her. But Raynal reacted first, and so he started calling healers to help the saint. Idessa then thought of good deeds and was able to utter her first words, which were immediately heard by the emperor and the episcopos. Idessa paid no attention to this. She knew that in order to survive and avenge all her humiliations, she had to do those very good deeds. So she explained to Raynal and Lennox that she wanted to help them. Although she hated to play by Ferdinand's asshole rules, she didn't have much choice. At the same time, the man sitting on the chair didn't understand why he was brought to some strange girl, because he wanted to meet the emperor himself. His assistants explained that the emperor probably wanted to placate them and ordered their boss to ignore the beauty of this girl, because it was an obvious trap, which they were sure of. But hearing them talk, the disgruntled Lennox demanded some respect. For they had had the great honor of being the first to see the image of the great saint, so everyone should be grateful for such an opportunity. But the men didn't believe Lennox's words at first, and then they laughed, for they thought it was a funny joke. They didn't care much for the Holy Virgin, but the foremost of them explained to the bishop that if this woman was the Holy Virgin, then he must be God himself. Lennox was very angry at the ignorance of these people and did not understand why Raynal had decided to call them at all. But the girl remembered Raynal's words. Raynal thought that educating such ignorant people was a good thing and just right for the Holy Maiden. Idessa realized that Raynal knew from the beginning that this man didn't believe in divine powers, but to mock the Holy Maiden so much was blasphemy. But because of the intense pain, Idessa fell from the couch to her knees, and the worried episcopos immediately tried to lift her up. The man continued to mock Edessa because the girl could barely stand on her feet. And the angry Lennox does not understand how they dare to talk about something like that, because they should have stopped and shut their mouths right away. After that, Lennox explained to Edessa and explained that he would take her to the infirmary because he did not intend to tolerate such a boorish attitude to their saint, especially since she felt terrible. But turning around, Lennox was shocked to see how furious Edessa was, which was not typical of a saint. Edessa promised that as soon as she left this idiotic world, she'd destroy those nasty people first, because no mortal had ever dared to mock her so brazenly. And even in the world of demons, everyone bowed before the greatness of Edessa, so she is sure to make such pathetic people sorry. The men continued to laugh, not realizing that the girl brought by the episcopos and also a holy maiden did not say anything. They couldn't believe she was mute. But the evil Edessa ordered these men to bow down before Her Majesty. Then she began to activate her spell. But to her great regret, nothing happened, because the magic didn't appear because of the seal. But Edessa didn't understand why it was like that yet. She truly wanted to burn the wretched man. And then finally, Edessa realized in her fury that Ferdinand K had decided to seal her powers, and for that she hated him even more. Then, this failure of the girl's spell made the man laugh even more, for Edessa reminded him of a beggar who held out her hand to be given some alms. And laughing as if at a funny joke, the insolent man even offered to give the girl some gold. Edessa was furious, for she had almost been killed by her worst enemy recently, and instead of dying with honor, he had sent her to Earth, sealing her powers and making her the weakest creature, namely a human being. But it seems that even this was not enough for Ferdinand, and he decided that she should be mocked by some crude animals like this man, who was now looking at her with a smirk. Edessa was furious and sadly realized that it would have been much better if Fernando had just killed her. Even that would have been better than such an existence. But when Idas began to lose consciousness, the man came closer and asked that Lennox had already confessed that in fact there was no Holy Virgin, and their god Ferdinand and the clergy once again decided to deceive the common people, making ordinary people sacred and perceiving the people as idiots. In addition, they also made up all sorts of stories and nonsense. So even though he had a good laugh, the man thought it was pointless, and he was already very tired of all these lies and such a circus. But suddenly there was some unknown power around Edessa, and a slight glow visible only to her. It was a divine radiance that immediately struck the man in front of her. So the same man who not long ago had been so boorish to her and had behaved so indecently bowed down on one knee before the girl and begged that the Holy Virgin would tell him what her name was. Although he realized that it didn't matter, and the man awkwardly wanted to confess to the holy girl that he couldn't overcome his feelings and fell in love with the holy maiden at first sight. Everyone in the room was astonished by what they heard, both the man's assistants and the guard who was watching from the sidelines. So they just stood there, silent in bewilderment. Edessa was very offended by such a confession because it sounded like another mockery. Moreover, she obviously could not be pleased with the love of this man because he is disgusting. But suddenly, Edessa looked at her body and realized that the pain that had been restraining her and preventing her from even breathing was suddenly gone, as if it had never happened before. The guys were anxiously looking at the man in love, trying to understand what had happened to him and how they should have brought him back to consciousness. They tried to reason with their brother, but he would not give in and continued to stand in his own place, paying no attention to anyone, not even to the guards. The man time after time repeated how beautiful was the Holy Virgin, because in his opinion the girl was so fabulous that he could not even take his eyes off her wonderful face. But suddenly, to the shock of all present, the man simply fell to the ground, but he still had the most peaceful smile and continued to laugh with happiness. His worried friends picked him up and put the man's head on their knees and tried to reason with him, explaining that they had previously warned him that he should not fall so in love with the beauty of this girl. After all, they were here to get money, not to break his heart. But this company was not known for their cleverness, for he had decided to make their intentions known to Bishop Lennox and the guards around him. The bishop was furious and immediately ordered his equally furious guards to take the heretics away. The guards immediately approached to seize the man and his minions. And then, looking at Edessa, The disgruntled lads in their right mind realized that if this girl had not appeared at all, everything would have gone exactly according to their plan. And so they ran towards Edessa in order to harm her. But at the last moment, unexpectedly, the same bright pink glow began to emanate from Edessa again, which even Edessa herself could not seem to control. After the influence of her divine powers, the man's whole body felt as if it was shackled by some very strange feeling. It reminded him of a feeling as if he had at one moment realized the beauty of the world and had become filled with some kind of faith, starting to see only the beautiful things around him. So it could be called a truly incredible feeling. And then, looking back at this reaction of this man who was just about to attack the girl, both Edessa herself and even the episcopos were stunned, not realizing what was even happening today. Then the man also fell on his knees before the Holy Virgin and thanked the girl for giving him such a great honor and blessing him with her divine blessing, which opened his eyes to many things. Whereupon he resolutely declared and even swore that from that moment he would be her faithful follower for the rest of his life and would never betray this faith, after having just found it through the power of the saint. But on coming to his senses, the discontented man began to calm the lad and ordered him to be silent, for it was he who was to be the man who would glorify the name of the Holy Virgin. And soon they began to quarrel, accusing each other of greed, for they both wished to bow down to Edessa. Then, the last guy in his right mind realized that this girl was no sainted maiden and had definitely bewitched his friends, so he was convinced that Edessa was a bloody witch, and he didn't know what to do. But he knew he had to get revenge on the girl. So he grabbed his dagger and went straight for Edessa, where the bishop approached the girl and tried to protect her. But the guards watching from the side did not understand whether they should stop the man because he could hardly do any harm, because he looked quite pathetic at that moment. But they decided to help, so they just pushed the man down to the ground with a slight push. And then, despite his failure in the attempt on her life, he glared furiously at Edessa and started cursing, accusing Edessa of being a devil, and the failure of their mission was only because of her. But as soon as their fierce and hate-filled gazes once again crossed, suddenly the man was also caught in an unknown spell. Everything around him seemed to glow, and he confessed to Edessa that it was thanks to the Holy Maiden that he had realized how beautiful the world was. And from what she saw, Edessa became very disgusted. But on the third attempt, she finally realized that when she burned some people who hated her with the same hateful look, they only began to fall in love with her more, which was the worst punishment for her. So Edessa began to curse Ferdinand again and again. But when it was all over, the emperor was standing in his study looking around, and when he heard a knock, he asked Lennox to come in. He thanked the emperor for his decision and explained that thanks to the powers of the Holy Maiden, the visitors to the palace had realized their sinful nature and swore their loyalty to the Holy Maiden and that they would never betray her. This surprised Renelle, though he didn't give any sign of it. But when Lennox left and Renelle was left alone, the lad finally admitted that this was indeed a rather interesting and curious development. Edessa wasn't even a simple demon, for she had once been the strongest demon of the underworld, as well as the owner of 2 horns and 3 pairs of black wings that displayed her power. These were the attributes that definitely proved Edessa's superiority over any other demon in hell. Everyone at least once saw Edessa in battle, and also demons swore allegiance to her and asked to become her loyal subjects, and only Edessa could grant them such grace and honor. But now it was a story of bygone days, and because she had been a high demon before, becoming a saint had hurt her self-esteem, and now Edessa was in the white cloak and spent her free time in the company of the bishop. She looked at herself and couldn't believe that she had once been the strongest demon of the underworld, because now her life was worse than even the lowest demons of the underworld, since she had become a human. As Edessa had nothing left to do for the day before dinner, the bishop decided to tell her a little about the local traditions, and seeing Edessa's interest in one of the paintings that hung on the wall, Lennox told Edessa with undisguised enthusiasm that the painting depicted the god of war Ferdinand at the moment of victory over the evil forces. And Lennox thought that the Holy Virgin had expectedly a fine taste for sumptuous painting, for this picture surprised everyone with its majesty. But Edessa was very displeased that Lennox really thought that she admired this god who made her suffer so much. And Lennox still could not believe in the saint's apparition and thought it was very nice that the Holy Virgin recognized her god at once. Idessa, who was thinking about Lennox's words, began to wonder when Ferdinand was considered to be the god who had defeated the forces of evil. For some reason, Idessa could not remember such a thing. So there was something positive about that title. But to be honest, Idessa was more interested in one person than anything else, namely their Emperor Raynal, who was reading a book at the time. Raynal looked around at his interlocutor and asked him to tell him what had happened to the three gentlemen who had come to see them recently. The bishop told the emperor that the three gentlemen had been instructed to infiltrate their imperial palace and somehow try to find out a little more information about the emperor himself, so the bishop thought that this should be recognized as treason. According to the laws of the Lucerne Empire, all three men were immediately sent to jail. But to Lennox's great surprise, for some reason, the men did not resist at all and went to prison voluntarily. The chief among the men was surprised that they were being sent to prison, but he agreed to send them there if that was the wish of the Holy Virgin, for he would do anything for Idessa's sake. They also decided that in prison they would be able to think over their mistakes and repent of all the sins they had committed in their sinful lives, and they would do so in order to serve the Holy Virgin better, as well as to serve their god Ferdinand. But they asked that the Holy Virgin should at least sometimes come to their prison and visit them in order that they might remember her well and afterward glorify her among the common people. Then Lennox felt a great embarrassment at this, to quote the words of these men, for it still seemed too unreal to him, and Raynal couldn't believe that all three men had so easily succumbed to the Holy Virgin's charms. But Lennox explained that there could be no doubt, but she clarified that their Holy Virgin, Idessa, had a unique gift. People only had to look at the girl for 3 seconds, after which they felt an incredible influx of bliss and love. But Raynal thought that this was a strange ability and looked too suspicious, and Idessa, who was listening to all this praise in her direction, began to vomit, because it all sounded really too pompous. But the bishop admiringly told his emperor that the Holy Virgin gave her parishioners God's love, so he considered this miraculous, because the girl could give true happiness. But Lennox cheerfully explained that he had previously studied the ancient records of previous high priests who had served the Lucerne Empire, and all of these high priests had described this ability as a divine gift from Ferdinand himself. Such a thing seemed amusing enough to the emperor, for the priests were always fond of writing much literature as if they had seen God with their own eyes for once. But it was impossible. Although Lennox did not like such words of the emperor, he was used to it, so he explained to the man that in any case, the authenticity of these records was confirmed by the Holy Virgin herself, when her abilities coincided with what was described. Raynal then asked Lennox to tell him more about the records he had found in those books, and if there was anything else of interest. He explained that there wasn't really much information in the books because no one with such divine power had ever set foot on their lands until now. Raynal was upset by this information, but he was absorbed in thinking about the Holy Virgin's ability, because this ability literally allowed him to deceive people's senses, making them loyal pawns in his game. And it sounded more like a demonic charm than a divine gift. And then Idessa thought about Raynal's words, because he was insanely insightful. But the bishop stood up for Idessa and explained to the emperor that Raynal was very wrong indeed, and reasoned that the gift that the Holy Virgin possessed allowed people who had never known the love of God to experience his grace for themselves. And in this power there was no evil intent, and this divine power was necessary only so that the holy messenger could convey the will of God and make people truly happy. After all, it was for this purpose that the Holy Maiden was sent to them from heaven. Idessa. Listening to all this felt incredibly disgusted, for the more she listened to the reflections on her purpose, the more she boiled with anger. Though she thought that if she were to reflect seriously on what had happened to her, it was an impossibly ironic situation. After all, Idessa had previously and for a long time been the ruler of the underworld itself, who had tried with all her army to kill God himself. But then, by the will of this same God, because of her defeat, Idessa was forced to become a holy maiden, and also the messenger of Ferdinand himself on earth. So Idessa was sure that if she ever told about such a thing to any of her demonic soldiers, no one would believe her, or rather consider it as a funny joke. But suddenly, Idessa felt a strange pressure in her hand, and when she looked at her mark, she realized that it had begun to pulsate weakly again, and this pulsation was increasing with time. Idessa remembered the three men and realized that she had wanted to kill such uncouth primates earlier, but as soon as she used her newfound strength, the pain immediately receded. So Idessa tried to understand what was going on and how she should interpret it. She had some guesses that made her very unhappy, but noticing her displeasure, which was evident on the girl's face, Lennox thought that something had happened to the Holy Maiden and that her wrist was hurting, so he offered to examine her wrist. Idessa thought about his suggestion, but afterwards she realized that neither this emperor with the stupid face, who looked perpetually displeased, nor this little saint who was always hanging around her, seemed to have noticed the mark on her arm. But Idessa realized that it was not so important, for first she had to think of a strategy. But first she wanted to understand something, though she was very much hindered by Lennox, who was always looking at the saintly maiden, trying to shout at her and bring her to her senses. Then Idessa opened her eyes and decided to see what she was capable of with her new power. As soon as she opened her eyes and looked at the worried Lennox, her charms evaporated. The bishop was very worried that the girl's face was twisted at one point, so he was worried that she didn't like the food or that she was in pain. Lennox earnestly requested that Saint should not be shy and ask for his help at any time so that he could do his best and more. Idessa thought about his words and felt a strange feeling, but she told Lennox of her worries. She told him that she had just tried to use her divine power on them, but it did not seem to work at all on Raynal or Bishop Lennox. Raynal remained cool-headed, but Lennox was very surprised that the saint wanted to experiment on them. Lennox worriedly explained to Lady Saint about being a high priest, so he had long since come to know the love of their lord. And it shouldn't work on them, the clerics. But then he looked back at the emperor, trying to figure out what was wrong with him and how to tell the saint why the powers didn't work on him. Then Lennox saw the smirk on Raynal's face. Lennox realized that if this guy was not the emperor, he would have long ago reprimanded the man for such a sneer towards the Holy Maiden and would have referred to the blasphemy of the emperor. But right now, Lennox didn't understand what he should do because he couldn't admit to the Holy Maiden that their emperor simply didn't believe in God. That was the reason why her power couldn't work on him. The emperor at this moment calmed down and hid his smile. Displeased, Raynal asked the saint if she was not taught manners in the kingdom of God because her act was quite rude. Idessa could not understand what exactly Raynal meant and whether he was really angry with her for using her divine powers without permission. And Idessa continued to wait for his further actions. But still, she replied that she had not been taught manners. Raynal didn't seem upset by this news, but he still expressed his regret about it. But Idessa wasn't going to just shut up and explain to the man that she was who she was. She was still a saint, despite her lack of manners. In fact, the girl was madly displeased that some human emperor had dared to insult the heavenly messenger herself. And apparently, he was not as simple a man as she had thought he was. Then Raynal admitted that he was not really bothered by manners or any etiquette, for he had long since grown tired of all this contrived politeness. However, there was something he wanted to ask the saint, for he had long had a question for her. Though Idessa did not understand what the question was about, she allowed him to ask it, though she noticed that he quickly changed the subject. But then, looking at Idessa with an attentive gaze and trying to read the answer in her eyes, Raynal wondered why the Holy Virgin, the messenger of God, was looking at him with such undisguised passion. When he heard this, Idessa's whole face flushed with embarrassment, and she was both indignant at his directness and displeased at such an assumption. So, Idessa demanded that Raynal explain why he thought she was looking at him with any passion. But this question surprised the boy, because he thought he was right, because it was obvious. Though Idessa thought Raynal's words were silly, and the look of passion did not fit her gaze, for now she looked at Raynal as if she wanted to strangle him, because Ferdinand's face was too familiar to her. In the end, though she realized that it might not work, Idessa tried to hit Raynal. But the boy immediately intercepted her hand and only smiled as she continued to gaze at the face of the sainted maiden. After that, he asked why Idessa was pulling her graceful hands towards him. Everyone in the room felt insanely awkward, both Epistat and the maids. But then, the agitated Lennox began to make excuses and explained to the emperor that Raynal's hair was a little disheveled, so most likely Lennox suspected that their saint only wanted to style his hair. And then, running a hand through the girl's hair, Raynal explained with a smile that it was very nice of the saint to take such care of his appearance. Raynal then stroked Edessa's hair, explaining to both Edessa and those present that he had previously thought that the girl wanted to say mean things about him because of his behavior. But it seemed that Raynal had indeed been mistaken about Edessa, and she was a saint, a truly kind and gentle girl. Lennox then joyfully explained to the emperor that he had been very wrong indeed, for in heaven the gods knew nothing of profanity or foul language. In fact, deep inside his soul, Lennox was very unhappy that some emperor had dared to treat a holy maiden as if she were not a messenger of God, but a small child. Lennox explained to the emperor that, as he had said before, the Holy Virgin had been sent to them by their god Ferdinand. So in heaven, the gods and angels knew no profanity and no evil and vice, so it was obvious that the Holy Virgin would treat everyone, including Emperor Raynal, with respect, as she had been taught in heaven. Edessa was very unhappy with this assumption, for she had behaved so politely, not because she wanted to, but because she could not do otherwise. Lennox awkwardly asked Raynal to show the saint the utmost respect in return, for she was not an ordinary person. But Raynal was really convinced that he treated the saint with respect. And then Edessa was even more angry, and she promised herself that as soon as the spell was broken, she would tell Raynal what she thought of him. After all, Edessa wouldn't show deference to an insect like him. But Raynal looked at Edessa with a smile and explained that it was a pity that in the worldview of the saints, there was no such thing as profanity, evil, and vices. And Raynal was sure that the saints were missing out on a lot by not allowing themselves even that. But then, noticing the displeased look on Edessa's face, Lennox decided that it was time to end the conversation and suggested that the emperor return to their main topic of conversation. Raynal began to remember what they were talking about, but he couldn't remember. Lennox suggested that they were talking about divine powers and returned to the subject of their conversation. He explained that the powers of the Holy Maiden allowed a person to know love and faith in God. But this power worked only on people who did not believe in their God. Raynal didn't really understand what that meant, and Edessa asked him to explain more. Lennox said that in the ancient records of the past high priests, he found some notes that said that this power was given by the god of war Ferdinand to attract new followers. Then Edessa realized what Lennox had just said, that her power, though divine, could not work on every person. Then Lennox explained that in order for the Holy Virgin's powers to work, the person she was using them on must either hate or loathe her. Otherwise, nothing would work. And if these conditions were met, the Holy Virgin would be able to cleanse the souls of these people of all vices. And then the furious Edessa realized that even such a useless in her opinion ability had its limitations, which was simply unbearable. But because of how hard the girl was straining, her eyes even hurt. But suddenly Lennox remembered that during the whole time of their communication, the Holy Maiden had never once told them her name. And so he was worried whether the girl did not want to talk, or whether she did not have any name. Then, thinking about it, Edessa remembered that several centuries ago, in the underworld where she was ruler, she had been called Edessa, a name that meant the strongest. But even though she was given that honorable name, no one during her reign ever addressed her by that name, not even mortals, though her service was long enough. Of course, Edessa assumed she had been born with a completely different name, but the memory of those days had long since been erased from her mind. It was all too long ago, and so now there was nothing left in Edessa but hatred for Ferdinand, whom she thought was truly terrible. And so, when Edessa wondered how much time had even passed since she had heard her name, but could find no answer. After all, Edessa lived quietly and never even once thought about her real name, which was given to her at birth. Because all that was busy with her head and thoughts, it was a thirst for revenge, and Edessa herself has lived so long that she has already forgotten about everything. She did not even remember why she wanted to take revenge on Ferdinand and what he was guilty of. What she knew was that at the memory of this man in her heart explodes and boils up such an immense storm of hatred. As soon as she heard this name from Raynal's lips, she suddenly felt a strange, long-forgotten feeling, as if she had forgotten something. And then Edessa remembered that none other than Ferdinand had once called her by the exact same name. Seeing this strange reaction from Silene, Raynal only smiled. Then he approached the Holy Maid, much to the embarrassment of the maids, as well as Lennox, who asked Raynal to move away as soon as possible. But he did not obey, and approached the girl and lifted her to her feet, then embraced her, scrutinizing all the features of her face, wanting to memorize as much better. Looking into her scarlet eyes, Raynal confessed that he really despised their god. But if Ferdinand decided to give him such a precious gift, Raynal was even willing to reconsider his attitude towards God. Then Lennox couldn't stand it any longer and began to scream loudly and panic, begging the emperors to release the Holy Maiden as soon as possible and not to torture the girl so much. But suddenly they were disturbed. A boy appeared in the room and bent down and explained to His Imperial Majesty that Milady Verdi wished to see him right away. This statement surprised Lennox very much, for he had heard that Verdi should have gone to her training a long time ago. Concerned, the boy explained that this was the case and that the girl had indeed gone to her training, but that suddenly in the middle of the training she had finished it and returned, saying that she had something urgent to discuss with His Imperial Majesty. And then the frightened epistat realized that Verdi should definitely not see what was happening between their emperor and Saint Celine. So the excited lad asked the favor to stop, for the emperor was very busy, and the girl could come to him a little later. But she did not obey, and so immediately afterward my lady entered the room and summoned the emperor. This girl was a candidate for the role of Holy Maiden of the People. Her full name was Verdi Mordecai, and everyone knew and respected her. But even though Lennox tried to calm Verda down, the girl cried out in shock when she saw Celine, who was in such an affectionate and tender embrace of the emperor, so she urgently demanded some explanation. And then the excited Lennox explained to Verda that she must not misunderstand, for now their Holy Maiden Celine was giving their dear emperor a blessing. This surprised Verda, for she did not know that a blessing could be given in such an indecent manner. And by this time, Celine had already freed herself from Raynal's grip, asking him not to grab her like that and cling to her anymore. "I understand Verdi's outrage then," Lennox awkwardly explained to the girl that what she saw was actually just an accident. This surprised Verdi very much, but Lennox convinced her that it was so. Then, looking around the place where they were, and the table set for dinner, Verdi wondered why the Holy Virgin had given her greatest blessing in such an unfavorable place, for it was not peculiar to saints, and so it displeased the girl very much. Whereupon Verdi became agitated and cried, and at once sat down on her knees before the emperor and was in utter despair. Verda folded her hands in a gesture of prayer and reminded her emperor that she had also been by his side all this time. And Verda restlessly did not understand what would happen to her now that another saint had appeared. She was worried about her future, and she was worried that the emperor no longer needed her, and this hurt the girl very much. For all this time she had worked hard for the prosperity of their empire, and had done her best and more. All Verda wanted was to keep the empire together with His Imperial Majesty, and so she looked pleadingly at Raynal, begging him to explain himself and tell her what would happen next. But the emperor gave Verda a serious look and demanded that the girl get off her knees as soon as possible. Though reluctant, she followed his order. She explained that if God had already sent them a true Holy Maiden, she wanted the emperor's permission to teach Celine about the outside world so that Celine could better understand their culture and their needs. Then Raynal realized that it might not be a bad idea after all, so he gave his permission for Verdi to spend time with Celine. But Celine grudgingly refused, explaining that she wouldn't allow something like that, and grudgingly looked at Verdi again, explaining that she didn't need help to figure things out. Verda herself was then very disturbed by what she had heard and did not know what to do. But Raynal laughed and looked at Celine with a kind smile, but explained to her that she didn't seem to understand that she couldn't decide such matters. After all, it wasn't her area of responsibility. When Lennox heard this response, he realized that it was rather cruel to Saint Celine. After all, she had her own desires that had to be satisfied. Verda didn't understand what was going on and looked around in panic at the emperor. Verda realized that there was something wrong with the Holy Maiden, and for some reason, something about her personality made her uneasy, though she hadn't figured out what it was yet. All the others also saw this strangeness. For looking at Celine, one could hardly believe that this girl was the Holy Maiden who had been sent by God. For she did not look like a noble and pious person. And Verda, looking into Celine's eyes and at their red color, which so strongly resembled scarlet blood, felt the presence of demonic power in her, which seemed to be blocked by something. and Salen's gaze as if trying to drag Verda to the very bottom of the underworld, that mad scarecrow Verdi. But then, still determined, but still a little uncertain, Verda asked Selene if she was definitely their holy maiden, for she was very much disturbed by the feelings she felt about the girl. But Selene herself was surprised at the question, so she asked Verdi unhappily if she could not see that she was a saint, and approached Verda with a scrutinizing glance, which made her shrink and worry even more. But then Verda looked at Selene again and saw that she was not a saint, for it was obvious. But Verda took out her silver cross, adorned with precious stones, and resolutely put it forward to protect herself from Selene's demonic influence, and explained to the girl that, for a holy maiden, Selene was too haughty and had a very rude look in her eyes. So Verdi ordered Selene not to come near her again. After that, she prayed loudly to her god Ferdinand and begged him to lend her at least a little strength, for Verdi was only a servant of the great god, but she wanted to reveal the true nature of this girl. Even the guards who were in the room started to worry a lot, but then the excited Epistat could not stand it. He intervened in the situation and called Lady Verdi and asked her to explain what was going on and why she was saying something like that. But then, holding back her tears, Verda shook with fear and explained to Epistat that she had met this girl before. And looking at the questioning looks of the others, she continued her story. Verdi told that she had seen Selene earlier in one of her prophetic dreams, which had appeared to her at times. And in this dream, it was truly a nightmare in the form of a deviless covered with blood, with several pairs of wings and 2 horns. And in this dream, it was truly horrible, for her whole body was soaked with the odor of the blood of the victims she had killed. But it seems that Idessa felt no guilt at the time, only a quiet bliss at the situation. Verda also said that in the same dream, the whole kingdom was swallowed up by a dark, impenetrable darkness, which seemed to have no end or edge. And through this darkness, there was not a single ray of light that could illuminate this defiled land. And in the palace, which had been blessed by Ferdinand, now sat the same girl with the face of Selene and a devilish grin on her face, for whom such a state of their country was only a pleasure. For in her was evidently a desire to destroy everything beautiful around her, turning the whole world into chaos and the likeness of a veritable underworld. And to do this, Selene had obviously made a great effort. But then Lennox, disturbed by her story, apologized to Verdi, who was respected by everyone, but he explained to the girl that she was mistaken. Even though Verdi did have prophetic dreams, this time it sounded silly, because Lennox himself had seen the Holy Virgin appear to them, and it was a great blessing for the girl to appear in the divine garden, just as the oracles had predicted. So you could call it a gift from God, no less. But Verda, looking at Lennox, did not realize that Epistat really wanted to accuse her of lying, for she was not an ordinary girl, but a saintly maiden of the Empire. So she thought her words to be trustworthy. And realizing that Lennox would defend the new holy maiden Selene, Verda did not give up and appealed to His Highness the Emperor, and explained to the man that in order to escape the imminent disaster, he immediately needs to lock this impostor in the dungeon, otherwise the irreparable will happen, which she was fully convinced. So Verdi asked that at least the Emperor listen to her words and save the people of their empire from a huge disaster. Then Selene awkwardly thought about Verdi's words. She realized that this girl was partly right, and her dreams were indeed dreams, and in the past she was a great ruler of the underworld with her army of demons. But now things were different, and it seemed to Selene that Verda must have sensed that besides her demonic nature and essence, she also had divine power within her. But all of a sudden, Selene felt much worse because of the seal that had been placed on her. So she looked at her hand and again felt a strong throbbing sensation, and it was as if her strength had begun to leave her, which made Selene very unhappy. She remembered that she had recently used her divine power to cast a spell on those 3 rude and rough men, which was still very disgusting to think about because they had dared to treat her so rudely. But it seems that despite this good deed, her divine power was still looking for an outlet and was harming her own body. So Selene stopped getting angrier and angrier, for now she realized how difficult her situation was, for she couldn't even take a breath, as she would immediately start to feel bad if she didn't do good things for a while. And it was really very tiring and uncomfortable. But even such a thing was not allowed because of her worst enemy, so she could not alleviate her suffering in any way. So now, obviously, Celine had to think of something and do some good deed. Otherwise, this terrible feeling that was robbing her of her life force would not go away, but would only worsen her condition. And maybe she would die. At this time, Lennox and Verda were still arguing, for Lennox was trying to prove to Verda that he himself, with many witnesses, had seen Celine emerge from the divine pond, so there could be no mistake. But Verda continued to argue that Lennox was wrong, for it was obvious that a demon of some high rank could have created some illusion to make them all believe in her divinity. And the two stopped only after the emperor had ordered them to do so, who was tired of listening to their constant bickering, for it was obvious that there was nothing constructive in their conversations. But suddenly, looking at Celine, the restless Lennox noticed that the saint seemed to be feeling ill because of all that was going on, and even Lennox himself looked exhausted, for he was very much disturbed by Verdi's behavior. But then, unable to bear the pain, Celine grabbed Lennox by his robe and shouted at him, forcing him to stop asking her anything. After all the girl wanted now was to go immediately in order to do some good deeds. And it had to be done immediately. She saw that she was clearly a demon, and realized that now that she had shown her true nature, everyone else would also believe her visions and her words, so she considered herself the victor. But Lennox thought otherwise. He explained to everyone present that he was not mistaken for a moment that Celine was the true holy maiden and no other way. He also explained that everyone should have looked at Celine at that moment and her determination. She was not offended by Verdi's words, but rather had a desire to help people, and so no demon in his right mind would want to do good deeds. So Celine was definitely a holy maiden, given to their people by the great god Ferdinand to give their people overwhelming love and faith, and to spread that faith beyond the borders of their lands. So weeping Lennox could not believe that anyone could still continue to doubt Celine's identity, and even accuse her of something to do with dark forces. But the troubled Verda asked the bishop what he meant when he said that Celine could bestow the all-consuming love of their god. But in order not to distract Epistat, who was now concerned about Celine's health, the emperor turned to Verda himself and explained to the girl that he had heard her concerns and understood her feelings. So to reassure Verda, he offered to personally accompany her so that she could see the powers their holy maiden possessed, and asked if that would be okay with her. The awkward girl agreed, realizing that at least this way she could get what she wanted. But Raynell also explained that until Verda had no definite proof of Celine's involvement with evil forces, or until Verda was convinced that the Holy Virgin was a true messenger of God, she should not spread the bad news of her dream to the people, because people trusted her, and if she did, panic and chaos could ensue. At this time, the troubled episcopos held Celine so that the girl could catch her breath and feel a little better, because she really did not look very well. But then Verda looked at her closely and realized that the feeling that came from Celine had not disappeared at all, and Verda was also convinced that the girl had absolutely no divine powers, for Verda could not even feel the face of a saint from her, which was very strange, for there must have been some saintliness in her if she was a holy maiden. The emperor was so kind to Celine, but the girl was a demoness, so Verda didn't know where to put her anger and how to calm down, because the thought of it made her furious. Verda could see that Celine was only pretending to be in pain, and was only doing it to cause pity and regret, and to pretend to be a sick martyr. Although it was obvious to the others that she was not, because Celine was really suffering from severe pain. As they walked on, the emperor turned to Verda, and she was happy to wait for the emperor's will, and realized that only if she eliminated Celine and proved that this girl was a devil, then Verdi would be able to be near the emperor, and no one would be able to stop her. But the emperor noticed that Verda looked as if she wanted to say something, and it was true, so she gave everyone a hard look, especially Celine, and explained that she had heard something on the way to the capital. She had heard from the poor, suffering people of a settlement not far away. There was a small village that was being tormented by an evil demon who was destroying everything around it and preventing the people from living peacefully and quietly. So Verda looked at Celine with a scornful look and explained that if Celine really claimed to be a saint, then it was also in her power to deal with the evil demon and defeat it. Then Celine could prove herself a saint. But the worried Epistat explained to Verda that this could not be so, and pointed out to the girl her mistake, for it could not be the duty of the Holy Maiden to fight evil, for the Holy Maiden, by nature, was only a guide to the true path and nothing more, for she had no power to do more than that. But instead of hiding, running away, or giving up, Seylan asked Epistat to calm down and stop worrying about her, and told him where the demon-afflicted village was. If it was true, Seylan would go there now to help the people. Then Epistat became even more anxious, and his hands shook with pride, for in his eyes now, the Holy Virgin Seylan had sacrificed her physical and moral condition after Verdi's attacks, and still wanted to go to the suffering village to help the people and rid them of the infernal beast like that demon. And so, filled with incredible gratitude, Epistatus, weeping, sat down on his knees before the saint, not understanding why the girl was so kind and brave, and swore to her that he would go with her even to the deepest depths of the underworld just to accompany the saint and help her in everything. And also, the guy ordered the rumor as soon as possible to prepare a carriage for their saint, because they had to go on the road now. Even though it was Celine's wish, she felt bad, so she didn't expect their trip to take place so soon. But nothing should be changed, otherwise it would cause more misunderstandings. But at the same time, Lennox, very proud of the girl, promised the maiden that whatever lay ahead of her, he would swear that he would always be on her side. For he could not see the devil's nature in her, no matter how hard he tried or how Verda persuaded him. So he resolutely announced to all present that they were going forthwith to the village to fight evil. On their way to the cursed village, Seylan and Verda rode on their horses accompanied by Epistat, the emperor, and their guards, and no one could leave the girls unnoticed. She was literally searing people with her displeasure, wondering why she hadn't met a single mortal who needed her help during their entire journey. Because Seylan was worried that if they didn't meet such people, she would get worse. And then she might pass out. And without people in need, she had no one to use her powers on. Whereupon Seylan also looked around, noticing Verdi's maddeningly disgruntled gaze that was fixed on her. It was obvious that this saint clearly hated her, burning her with her gaze. But because Verda had a strong belief that Seylan was a demon, Seylan's charms didn't work on her. And Seylan cursed Ferdinand as much as she could for putting such a seal on her, which made it so hard for her to live. Even her head felt like it was splitting. But Edessa assured him that everything was fine, and asked him when they would be able to get to the right place, as she was already nauseous. But Lennox calmly explained that they would be there soon, as it was not far to go. The longer she waited, the worse it got, so she needed to fight evil with her own strength. Lennox, understanding the saint's desire to help people, suggested that she pray for him in order to calm her desire to help people. It was obvious that Seylan did not like such an offer, for it would do her no good. But she asked how she could pray for someone. Lennox happily explained that it wasn't really that complicated, and there were only a few simple rules, as everyone had to bow their head and lock their hands together to pray. Then Seylan could express what she wanted the most, such as wishing for the strength, wisdom, love, and compassion of their Lord Ferdinand. The frightened Lennox did not understand what he had said wrong and why the Holy Virgin had suddenly become so angry. Looking around them from the side, Reynald didn't understand what was going on between these two and what they were busy with. But at this moment, Verda noticed how much that fake Holy Maiden had squeezed poor Epistat's skull, and also noticed her insanely angry, furious gaze. So Verda couldn't stand it any longer and went to get closer to Seylan and Epistat and demanded that Seylan immediately take her dirty hands off of their Epistat. But even Epistat was surprised by this reaction and the way Verda was cursing at the innocent girl. Verda then resolutely took out the cross and explained that Verda had just revealed her true colors in front of all the people in the neighborhood, and what she had really intended to do all along. So Verdi hoped that God would give her the strength to cleanse this world of evil and get rid of such a devilish brat. And then the cross shone so strongly that it blinded the standing people and even frightened Lennox's horse, which began to rage. And also this power began to influence those around it. So Lennox grudgingly ordered Lady Verda to stop, for she had no idea how much this power could harm the children. Around then, the frightened girl immediately stopped using the sacred power and started looking around trying to find the child. Lennox also tried to find the girl, for he had recently seen her near his horse, but now the little girl was nowhere to be found. But then, looking around, they noticed what was now standing with the child in the distance was Celine, comforting the girl. Verda was worried, for just now Celine had been on horseback, but now she was in the distance, and so she did not understand when the girl had managed to move so quickly. But at that moment, looking at the child, Celine asked the girl to calm down. Then, making sure that the girl was okay, she was going to put the child on the ground. Verda looked at Celine with a displeased expression and didn't understand what had happened. If she was really wrong in her conclusions, because this sensation would be enough to blind a strong demon. And in that case, her assumptions were wrong, but still she wondered who Celine was. But then she grudgingly realized that no living creature would have had time to jump off the horse and carry the child that far in that time. So Verdi wasn't going to give up, and she definitely felt that there was a dark power involved. But only a demon of the highest rank could have such powers. But no sooner had she thought about it than Raynal approached her disgruntled, demanding an explanation from Saint Verdi. The man did not understand who at all allowed Verda to be so willful and allow herself such behavior, which could harm those present. And then, frightened by the emperor's words, Verda began to explain that she only wanted to help poor Epistat, and nothing more than that. But the disgruntled emperor reminded Verdi that the girl should not act so recklessly, for he himself could make a decision about Celine, and did not understand if his words meant nothing to Saint Verdi. The frightened girl immediately began to prove the contrary, and explained that she only wanted to protect Lennox from evil forces. But the emperor was not bothered by her excuses. Going away, the man explained that next time he would not tolerate her disobedience. Verda didn't understand what had changed, and why the emperor reacted the way he did. Even when she had made mistakes before, Raynal had never been so angry with her before. Verda was determined to deal with it as soon as possible, before the charms deeply affected Raynal's heart. Verda did not blame herself for what was happening, but the saint who had appeared out of nowhere and taken her place. The emperor ran up and looked at Celine and the child, asking if she was all right. But Celine thought the emperor was worried about the child and explained that the girl was fine. But as it turned out, Raynal was more worried about Celine, but the girl also explained that she was fine, so he shouldn't have been worried. But suddenly, grabbing the girl's hand, the emperor grudgingly pointed out that Celine had hurt herself, and it clearly couldn't be called normal. And also, Raynal reminded that the Holy Maiden should take care of her fragile body. Therefore, she urgently needed to treat the wound. But Celine was not happy that Raynal saw her as some weak woman, so she yanked her hand and explained that such a wound would definitely heal before her death. But at that moment, the already anxious Lennox approached, asking the Holy Maiden if she was sure she was all right. But suddenly, thinking about it, Celine felt that her arm was no longer in unbearable pain, and it was because she had saved a child. But Celine didn't know when she would get worse again, so she had to hurry. So she sat down a little with the girl and explained that they had come here because they had heard that something terrible was happening in the neighboring village, and she wondered if the girl knew about it. The girl resolutely shook her head and explained that she knew nothing, but Celine saw a mark on her chest that made her uneasy. So she pulled back her sweater to get a closer look at it, and the excited Lennox, who had already come running, didn't understand what it was. But Celine explained that it was demon seed, and demons infect human children, turning them into their own kind. Demons actually hate taking care of children, so they invented a way to make a human child into an independent adult. It was a disgusting and despicable act, even for Celine herself. So when she became a supreme demon, she tried her best to ban the creation of demons from humans. But once she became mortal, the demons started up again. So she didn't know what to do, and a troubled Lennox didn't know what would happen to the girl. Idessa knew that the children's bodies were weak and completely unprotected against the powerful demons, and so they could not resist the evil charms, and in the end, the child's body was torn apart, and from its remains, a new demonic creature was born. So, with a determined look at Verda, Celine demanded that the girl come over here. She obeyed and waited anxiously to see what the demoness would say to her, but Celine calmly asked if Saint Verda could purify this child with her cross. Verda could do it, but she felt that since Celine needed to prove that she was the true Holy Maiden, she should be the one to cleanse this child of the filth. But Celine was not satisfied that she couldn't do that, which was the reason why she called Verda here. But Verda did not understand how a saint who had been sent by the gods could not even cleanse a man of his foulness, for it was foolishness. But then, mad with anger, Salen wondered if Verda had even thought to mock her in such a situation. They didn't know how long ago this child had been infected, so every minute counted, and if Verda continued to sass Salen and do nothing, the child's death would definitely be on her conscience.